the beginning. I was looking at a timeline of where whatever the Gospels cover. Matthew and Luke start about 5 BC. This one starts before there was a time. So we're going to read from the beginning. Let's look at these words together from John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testifies concerning him. He cries out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' From the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." I wonder sometimes, do we actually know why Jesus came? I mean, I remember the Christmas version, the one we celebrated just recently. That's the one we really love to tell. Jesus comes and finds himself born to the poor, the powerless descendants of David. The King of Kings disguised as a peasant, the creator of the universe, wrapped in flesh, a baby born to deal with our sin. But I wonder, would John make the story that simple? He leaves all that baby stuff out. There's no manger, no inn, no Mary, no Joseph, no wise men, no angels, no shepherds, no political intrigue. In fact, all of that human drama stuff, gone. It's absent in his telling. Well, save the fact that you and I are in the story, but we're in darkness and we don't understand. We're present, but clueless. And that darkness is not simply sin. It'd be easy to make it that. But it's a little bit bigger than we normally think. That darkness is present because of our ignorance, because of our lack of seeing, our unwillingness to understand. And that makes me ask why. Why does John tell his story the way he does? Did he write it because we already have those other versions? The one with the little town of Bethlehem? But there's something missing? And that makes me ask the question, what did that version give me but didn't let me see? Because John says, I'm in darkness. So although I have that, there's still something I'm lacking. John's beginning shares more with the beginning of Mark than it does with Matthew or Luke. The focus is on this Lamb of God who will take away the sin of the world. John the Baptist testifies. But John doesn't really start there, does he? He starts farther back. He starts at the beginning of the beginning, even before Genesis. He goes back farther than the let it be to what is, what has always been. God exists. That's how John begins his story. God is the great I am. And that great I am, John tells us, is the Word. That's the way he writes his beginning. God exists. God is the Word. And while I won't try to teach a Greek lesson, we'd all be bored to death. Jesus is the Word of God, the logic, the reason, the rationale, the mind. The mind of God that imagines and creates the entire universe. He not only creates it, he sustains it. He is the very essence of life, that without him, we aren't. Imagine that. God is gone. God doesn't exist. You know what John tells us? We aren't. We only exist because God exists. We are created. The Word exists, but we are a creature. And we are supposed to see the difference. We're supposed to understand that Jesus isn't created. Yes, he's born in flesh, but he is. He already was. It's a little bit confusing, but he is the reason, the rationale of God, the creative power behind all things, everything that exists. God speaks, let there be, and it is. That's the story that we learned. He ordered the universe. He set its laws in place. He told the planets where they should spin, the sun how to blaze. He told the ocean where to stop, and he makes gravity hold you together. Because without it, have you learned yet? You aren't. Without God's creation, the order of the universe, the rationale for how the world works and the universe exists, you aren't. Every bit of the marvelous and wonderful creation that surrounds you is produced by the imagination of God. Every bit of it. And without his imagination and his mind, we just aren't. And he has made it all to reveal his glory. It was made for him, by him, for his glory. And yet Paul tells us in his gospel, in Romans chapter 1, that we don't see it. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Paul tells us the same gospel beginning. God exists, God is, God has created, God is revealed, God is known, and yet we reject. It's the same thing that Dan was telling us this morning as we took the Lord's Supper together. Jesus is revealed, and we reject. And in that rejection, darkness sets in. We can't see. We can't understand. And that is why Jesus came, to make God known. The Creator whose creation would rather say, this is my favorite, we would rather say we are a cosmic accident. We shouldn't be. That's the way that I think of accidents. If I'm driving on the freeway and I have an accident, I wish it wasn't. If I trip and fall, I wish I hadn't. And the creation of God will speak in one voice and say, all the same, we'd rather not. We'd rather believe we have no purpose. We have no design. We have no meaning. Because we will reject the Creator. We would rather say we're an accident. Or, I suppose, let's make up our own gods. Let's invent the Creator ourselves. And let's tell everybody that we invented him, but it's really real. And we can make up whichever ones we want. So convenient. Because we are creation like that will either reject God, the Creator, or make our own gods, well, now we begin to understand why we're in darkness. We do not see, and we do not understand. Because rather than come to know the true Creator, his design, his logic, his reason, his rationale, his purposes, we would rather be mired in our own arrogance, obsessed with our own glory, and so we do not see God, nor do we give him the worship he deserves. I am in darkness because I choose not to see. How many times will the gospel writers tell us that? We will reject seeing. We don't want to see the light. We don't want to be in the light. And so the light that we rejected, the light that cannot be contained, stepped into creation and wrapped himself in flesh. The painter jumped into the painting. That's my favorite image. Wouldn't that be really cool? Somebody's just painting and then things that weren't all of a sudden start being, and you're like, they're just holding a paintbrush. How are they doing that? Well, we're going to see that story. Dead flesh alive again. Water, wine. Diseased, decayed being restored. There's a painter in the painting. That's why he's weird. Because he's not bound to the rules that you and I are bound to. The artist, the author, he's in the story. And he's changing the ending. The one you and I write for ourselves, he changes. Because you see, we're not the creator. We are the creature. And he is here to reveal the glory of God. How many times will Jesus say that? That he's here to help us see God. To see the glory of God. To see the light. And if we want to live in the light, John is not touchy-feely, I have to tell you. He's gotten a bad reputation. He is controversial. He is confronting. Because you see, you have darkness and you live in it, and he wants to show you the light. And so when Jesus speaks in John, be prepared. It's going to be a little bit painful. Because Jesus will tell us. Jesus will show us. And if we want to live in the light, we have to accept the truth. Jesus is the revelation of God. That's one of the biggest things John is going to tell you. Jesus is the revelation of God. And if you don't know him, you don't know God. Our world will not like that. Because it means, quite simply, if I don't accept Jesus, I don't accept the one who sent him, that's where the story would end. If I don't accept Jesus, I don't accept the one who sent him. And if I don't accept God, I live in darkness. John wants to tell us a story. I have to be very careful because sometimes when I say that word story, people think of other things. I'm not talking about Cinderella. And I'm not talking about a story that begins like this, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I am not talking about those kinds of stories. I'm also not talking about preacher stories. A lot of those are made up too, or altered to serve a purpose. This one is not altered. This one is the story. His story, the story of Jesus. And it is not simply history. It is the present. It is right now. Do you know why I know that? Because Jesus exists. No beginning, no end. He is. So it is not history. It is present. And fortunately for you and me, the story is also future. The right now and the will be. And that's good news. John wants to tell us about the true God, the creator of all things. He wrapped himself in flesh and was born to the poorest of the poor in a backwater world that did not know him, and they didn't accept him. But John says he met him. He didn't just see him, he touched him. That's a big deal. He ate with him. He had a meal. John said, "Hey, Jesus, have you heard this one?" Jesus said, "Probably." But he laughed all the same. He lived with him. He walked where he walked. He saw Jesus fall asleep. It's a very strange image. But John tells the whole story so that you understand that God lived in a package of flesh. That's his point. He's trying to get you to see. Do you know why that's so important? I mean, I know that you should know this story, but do you know why that's so important? That God walked and talked and lived? Because he died. John watched it all in disbelief. This cannot be. God cannot die. But he did on a cross. That's why Paul says, you see, for those who don't believe, that's just foolishness. It's just foolish. Doesn't make any sense. Do you know why? John tells you, they're in darkness. They cannot see. They don't understand. But you see, I need Jesus on the cross. I need him there. Because if he was not, I would be. John begins to get the story, the present and the future. Because God cannot die. That's exactly right. He did, but he can't stay dead. And that gives me hope. Do you know why? Because if his body isn't in the grave, guess where mine won't be? In the grave. He saw it all. And he wants to tell you the story. He saw the glory of God. That's what he's telling you. I saw Jesus, the glory of God, the one and only creator of all things. I saw him. He wants you to know him because he knows something about encountering Jesus. If you do, guess what? You're changed. You're changed. The transformation, the encounter with the painter, the artist, the author, your story is changed. And that's a good thing. So you are in this story. Your past, your present, and your future is right here in these pages because the author of life, is trying to speak. And if you will listen, and you will hear, you will see, and you will be changed. He wants you to know Jesus. Because if you know Jesus, you can live. Not that fake life. Do you know what fake life is? It's where you pretend. And it's not real. And it's fleeting. And you can't control it, you can't capture it, and it scares you to death. Fake life. Real life. That Jesus came that you could have real life. A life that does not end. It is not spoiled. It's not corruptible. It can't be extinguished. You could have that life. Real life. The very thing you've always known you needed. Something real. Not made up. Something real. The very thing you know you need, real life, you can live it. Past, present, and future. Right now, you can have real life. And that real life has the ability to overcome anything that stands against you. Now, only you can make that list. I don't know it. I can guess. I've been around the block. But you know what stands against you, what makes you afraid, what worries your heart, what you're afraid you'll encounter tomorrow and do again when you don't want to. The life of Jesus can defeat even that because he is the author. You can live and you can overcome. That's what John wants you to know. You can. You can overcome all that stuff that makes you feel less. Worthless. Or the uns. Unable. Unwanted. Unloved. The impossibles. John's going to tell you about some impossibles. You watch. Because it's like possible. Impossible right before his eyes. And John will tell you all about it because he's going to tell you about Jesus. And he does it for one purpose only. All these things have been written down so that you might believe. Because if you believe in the one and only, oh man, you can have life. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. It's why we worship Jesus, because he is the glory of God. He is the revelation of the one and only, the Father that none of us have ever seen, but you can have Jesus. If you have never claimed Jesus, if you have never professed belief in him, but you know that you should and that you're driven to confess his name, then we want to provide you the opportunity to do that. We want to provide you the opportunity not only to say that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, but to accept the sacrifice of Jesus for you, to participate in his death and resurrection by being baptized, by being raised to life again, empowered by the Spirit of God. And if you're a believer, but you need the prayers of the church, because you need Jesus present in some way in your life to overcome something, we gather for that too, to pray for one another. Whatever your need is, I hope that you'll make it known, that you'll come forward and let us encourage you today. Let's stand together as we sing.